So the jackhammer got nerfed. There's a triple yellow hit limiter now. In theory, that would be good. I actually suggested something really similar in the past. Several months ago, I made like a small rebalance idea of the jackhammer, and a lot of people were receptive to it. A lot of people who are into sort of like theoretical balancing stuff. But what we got is an absolutely lazy excuse of a balance for the jackhammer, and I'm going to talk about all of the reasons why, all of the consequences of this balance change, and what I think we should do moving forward. So to recap, the balance changes claim hitting 3 or more yellow hits in a short period of time, regardless of variation, will now force the alternate shotgun to cool down to avoid spam. Okay, so what does this actually mean? Here, let me get like an insurrectionist in here. So essentially what this does, in theory, is it stops you from getting, 3 yellow hits in quick succession. And it does do that. It succeeds in that. It puts your hammer on cooldown. But there are so many problems with how this actually functions in the code versus how you would intuitively think it does. So, okay, so the first thing you need to know is that what it counts as spamming is basically any time you land another jackhammer hit within a 3-second bracket of your last hit. So basically if you land a hit 2.99 seconds after your previous hit, that counts as spamming with the jackhammer, for the record. So here I'll show you. Right, I'll wait a little bit and boom. Okay, that's another hit. I'll wait a little bit and boom. And that puts the weapon on cooldown. So that seems like spamming, apparently. That's what spamming is. But that's not all, right? So you can land the 3 hits in quick succession, right? One thing they don't tell you is that if you land a hit with another hammer, it also goes on cooldown, and another hammer, it also goes on cooldown. So you get 2 free yellow hits, and then the next hit puts it on cooldown, and then the hit after that puts it on cooldown, and then the hit after that puts it on cooldown. So you can get up to 5 hits total, period. That's all you get. And then all 3 of your hammers are on a 7-second cooldown. Oh, and before I blow my top off, if you're interested in earning some money and you're an artist, you can join my Discord and you can compete in the emote competition where you try to make emotes. Your presence is obviously appreciated, so go ahead, join there if you want. So they're basically telling us, hey, if you like triple jackhammer, you can go fuck yourself. So that's basically what they're telling us with this update. But that's not all. There's also several other things you need to go through. Red gauges don't affect this yellow count at all. So, first of all, landing a red gauge won't chain yellow hits into one another. But if you land a red gauge, it won't stop your yellow hit from still counting. So the fact of the matter is, if you try to exploit this by landing a red gauge hit on the 3rd hit, it doesn't actually count towards anything, right? So, right, and I try to go with another hit with this hammer, yellow gauge puts it on cooldown, also puts it on cooldown. So there's only one way to use triple hammer now, and that is, unless you're breaking up your hammer hits with something, that's fine. The idea in theory of landing 2 yellow hits and being punished on the 3rd is fine, right, in theory. However, there's no way to manipulate this. There's no strategic advantages to trying to play around this mechanic here. Unlike everything that I've seen suggested for the jackhammer, anything I've suggested myself for the jackhammer, this is the fastest and worst way to kill absolutely everything you could do with this weapon. This is miserable. Triple hammer fans around the world should be mad at this. On top of that, if you're curious, because this does interact with dual wield power-ups, so let's check that out. Right? It will put all of your hammers on cooldown if you try to do a single volley with the jackhammer. Now, notably, it still let me do the 4th hit, right? It let me finish my volley, but it still put every hammer on cooldown, right? And then same goes for every consecutive hammer. So every level with a dual wield power-up, yep, screw you. I guess you just don't get to, reap many of the benefits of it. You get 1 hammer hit total, and it almost always, unless you get just 1 power-up, right? 4-2 is the only one you can get 4, right? But the ones you just get 1 power-up, you have to get 2 yellow hits, and then every hammer hit within 3 seconds after that have to be red gauges, right? They're removing so much freedom strategic freedom that you have in using the jackhammer in creative and interesting ways. On top of that, there's another bug where normally if you hit idols, I'll even throw, you know, the new enemy into there. If you hit idols with the jackhammer, it will not put the weapon on cooldown, even if it's a red gauge. So here, I'll actually, here. Red gauge hit, right? Doesn't put the weapon on cooldown, naturally, right? Because you're not actually dealing damage, whatever, and it's just a quality of life thing. But here anyway, let me land yellow gauge hits on them. Okay, so that puts it on cooldown, right? Also puts it on cooldown, right? It's miserable. It's absolutely miserable. I'm sure that's just a bug, and I'm sure that's gonna get patched out, but I think we have bigger fish to fry than fixing a little idle interaction, so I hope that's not all they do with this weapon. On top of everything, well, this is considered a bug, or at least, let me rephrase this. They removed the ability to hit ridden rockets with a hammer. Now, this was quote-unquote an accident. It's a bit complicated. Basically, Hectech thought that it was a bug or an unintended mechanic or whatever, and they decided, hey, I'm just going to switch this off. It's not going to mean anything, right? And it wasn't in the patch notes for that reason, right? So they thought it was completely inconsequential. Whatever. Obviously, anyone who's like intermediate to advanced in this game knows that there's a lot of tech associated with hitting your ridden rocket with your hammers. So there was small outrage for that, and they said, oh, I didn't know there was any, you know, mechanical benefit to doing it, so we'll talk about putting that back into the game. Probably going to be getting it back, so I'm not overreacting about that. However, that does highlight how unaware at least Hectech, and Hectech isn't the absolute, you know, opinion of all of the entire dev team, but how unaware they are of how significant that is for the hammer especially, it kind of blows my mind. Again, I like forgive and forget, but you know, it's evidence to show that they don't really know how to balance the highest level of this weapon. Now, there's another reason why I brought up specifically rockets with hammers, and that's because there's one hammer that has a very special relationship with all of these mechanics. Notably, right, the core eject. And you know, you have like flicker nukes like this, you have RTC nukes, you can do stuff like double hammer boosts, which are now very neutered. Like, I have to jump off this rocket in order to hit it. Even still, I messed it up. Right, like that. Because I can't hit it while it's behind me anymore. And while I'm riding it, I mean. So, yeah, lots of issues with that, obviously. But I want to highlight the fact that the CE Jackhammer, for these reasons, is the best jackhammer in the game. The strongest one, easily, for all of the tech that it has and how well it scales with, like, campaign, and it's being used a lot more in speedrunning nowadays, in cybergrind, basically all of the settings it is really strong in. Now here's one thing. Hitting rockets or cores with the hammer doesn't actually do anything about its cooldown. So here I'll just, you know, hit the insurrectionist with some cores, and you know, that's one hit, that's two hits, that's three hits, and the hammer's completely unaffected. Nothing happens to the hammer. Same thing goes for rockets, right? The hammer is completely unaffected when you hit rockets and cores. And people are saying, yippee, yay, this is awesome. That means we get to keep all of our tech. They're going to put this back in the game. It's going to be great. Well, guess what? That means that the way they tried to balance the hammer doesn't actually apply to the best hammer in the game. So what they're also trying to say with this change is that there's no problem with all of the really strong shit that the jackhammer can do. The only thing that there is a problem with, and it says it in the patch notes, is avoiding spam with yellow hits, right? Their words. So, what does that mean? I'll tell you right now, as the guy who wrote the guide on jack shots, right? The way you're exploiting yellow hits is specifically, as most people claim, which isn't fully true, by hitting an enemy repeatedly with a yellow gauge hit, right? So they're saying that's, you know, really strong, it needs to be tuned down, right? It really doesn't. It's roughly 10 damage per second. If you factor in fists or whatever, the damage can go up to roughly 12 damage per second. And specifically, I'm saying 10 damage per second, even though it's 2 yellow hits, which is 12 within 1 second. most people are doing this with the whiplash. A really good player is going to be spamming yellow hits in a way that's actually pretty difficult to perform, especially during active combat. And I guess I'll show you. Right? Something like that, right? Basically exploiting, you know, a backblast cancel so that you can get repeated hits, because the whiplash has actually a 0.5 second cooldown, which is the exact time it takes for a hammer to swap to itself repeatedly, right? And that's the yellow gauge spam cycle, is that after the first hit, which takes 0.9 seconds to prime, every consecutive hit is 0.5 seconds of swap time. But since the whiplash actually has a 0.5 second cooldown, you can only really whiplash the enemy again and pull yourself back after, right? You get to press the button after 0.5 seconds, which gives a margin of time where you actually have to land the whiplash on an enemy, right? And then also pull yourself to the enemy for another hit. So you're not actually perfectly timing your hammer for each hit by 0.5 seconds, as much as, you know, most people would like to claim. It's really not true. So what you're actually getting is roughly something along the lines of 10 damage per second, not 12 damage per second. Now, the only actual way that this can become really strong is if you use the pump charge jackhammer, right? Is if you pump during hit stop. So if you do one of these, you're basically adding a pump during the hit stop to add 3.5 extra damage to the enemy that you're targeting. So that makes every hit 9.5 damage, right? And that adds up quickly to roughly, well, optimally, that would be 19 damage per second. Or, you know, if we round down the average, it's more like 17 damage per second. And that's actually a bit strong. That's actually pretty strong. It definitely is a lot stronger than on most other weapons when it comes to single target damage, and it's pretty easy to do. That right there is something I can understand criticizing, right? Because you're just adding a free 3.5 damage to every yellow hit. But it's not the yellow hit that's making it strong. It's the 3.5 damage added onto that that's making it strong. There are so many different techs in this game that can be applied quicker, that can do more damage to more enemies than not just one enemy. But we have to target the hammer for some reason, because the yellow gauge can be done repeatedly, and because, well, the actual reason is because 3.5 damage can be added onto it every time, right? That's what we should be balancing. If that was the issue, which it is, we should be targeting the 3.5 extra damage that comes with the first pump. We could rearrange the damage numbers on the first, second, and third pump if we have to. And we should. We should make the first pump 2 or 1.5 damage. Second pump should be, you know, 3.5 or 4 something damage. Like, you know what I mean? We can actually do something creative about that. But instead what we get is all hammers suffer this, except for the one that's already strong. This hammer doesn't suffer a little bit, and it's the strongest one already. This one is just fine. It's really good in a lot of scenarios. It's better than, I would say, 70, 80, 90% of the roster. You think you could argue for all of those positions, right? And in the midst of all of this, just the child that has to watch both of its parents suffer, right, is also suffering from this. It already has the chainsaw nerf where you can't repeatedly chainsaw an enemy, right? Which is fine, right? Everyone knew this was coming, right? You'll sit here and the chainsaw will break. Same thing goes for if you send it out, right? Up to 60 total ticks, I think it was, and you're getting repeated ticks by holding it in melee range, but if you send it out, you also get ticks for high value damage. That takes skill, right? And that's why that's not being punished. Now, going back to the whole 3-second buffer thing when it comes to, you know, each consecutive hit with the hammer, I do need to specify that every hit isn't independent of one another with these 3 seconds. It actually is just a full-on, full coverage 3-second bar, and if you hit any time during this, it'll reset that bar and keep the current count of yellow hits, right? It's not that each yellow hit has an independent 3-second counter. All of them share the same 3-second counter that just gets reset every time you land a hit. Oh, and just mentioning one more thing. In the middle of all of this, there's actually no way to tell, like, if you are still keeping up with the consecutive count of yellow gauge hits, because there's no, like, audio or visual way of understanding how many hits in you are, right? It would be cool if, you know, like, the pitch of the hammer hit went up every time you landed a consecutive hit, so you were like, okay, I'm doing consecutive hits, I'm gonna get punished for it, let me not do that. Or, you know, like, maybe the hammer, like, it ejects steam or something. There's a million ways that they could have incorporated something like this, and it's not here. And, you know, despite, like, the whole dev team's, like, design philosophy being, this needs to be clear to the gamer, this needs to be something that they can experiment with, and it's realized in the moment, and, like, beginners can pick this weapon up and feel like they know what they're dealing with, like, but none of that, absolutely none of that is present with this change. It makes it really feel like this was a change that they implemented 1 hour before release or something like that, because they still oh, look at the corkboard on the dev team's, you know, list of things to do. We forgot that people are complaining about Jackhammer yellow gauge hits. We got to do something about this. Oh, well, there's updates coming out in an hour. Let's figure out something quick. And they just typed up some code and threw the slop into the game. And this is what we have currently, is the Jackhammer, which is basically dead if you use all three of them in the same loadout. Not a single time ever in this game has there ever been a triple default or triple alternate loadout that has been absolutely terrible, just because of the very fabric of the weapon itself. But now we have that, and it's terrible. It's just terrible. I see no good reason for this to stay. I do think there are right ways to do a 3-hit limiter. This is not how we do it. This is the laziest implementation of this idea. With all the evidence we have towards like how some of the devs view like the mechanics of this weapon and like how rushed a lot of the aspects of fraud feels, this weapon is easily being extremely mistreated. And I don't want to sit here and pretend like all of that is okay. Granted, there's still so much time for this to improve, but I really haven't seen many other people aside from some people I already know who already like the hammer, who run triple hammer, you know, the people that I should trust about this, because there are some people who run mostly shotguns and they think this is fine, or like people who just run the CE jackhammer and they're like, this is fine, there's no, you know what I mean? Like, we shouldn't really do anything about this because I'm not running into any, you know, like cooldown issues. Like, of course you're not. You're running the CE jackhammer and it's not affected by this. God, we need to call this out, because if the hot fixes come in and this isn't changed, then I don't know what I'll do. I don't know what I'll do. But I guess I'll take the last moments of this video to actually talk about what I would do in their position if I were them. I'll quickly put my own post on screen so you can follow with me. Now, this is mostly nerd shit. Like, you know, it's pretty much a big text wall. But what I suggested was that we add a heat system, and it would be something where, like, you know, the heat is constantly depleting, but, you know, using the weapon would actually give you a lot of heat. So, you know, something similar to the green nail gun, for instance. And green, yellow, and red gauge hits would give you different amounts of heat. So basically, what it would say is you would get half heat whenever you would use a yellow hit, right? So 2 hits would give you 2 halves of heat, but the heat would be coming down at that point. So you would have still enough heat to land a final yellow gauge hit. And a red gauge hit would just give you full heat instantly, right? So it recontextualizes what a red gauge hit means. And finally, green gauge hits and hits with hammers and rockets would add a quarter of heat, right? So that, you know, you could still do double hammer boosts and not feel as punished for doing it. It's still strong, it's still fun, but all the weapons are suffering equally under these conditions. I said, for instance, in this post that heat would deplete at roughly 0.25 per second. So eventually you would have this built-in system where you actually have a triple hit limiter. And that's great. I think, again, like I said, a triple hit limiter can be done well. It's in the suggestion I made. And even a well-renowned moderator, Joko, in the ULTRAKILL Discord server, agreed when I first put out this idea that this was a really good idea, and it actually fixes yellow hit spam, right? Because, you know, you're actually punished. You have to be, one of your hammers has to go on cooldown by the time you do this. But the kicker here is the fact that if you would hit max heat on a weapon, or you would put it on cooldown, all the other weapons would have their heat reduced to 0. So for instance, to put this in the scope of what we have currently, if I were to land 3 hits, right, all of the other weapons would be able to do 2 more hits and then be put on cooldown as well, right? So you would do 1, 2, and then final hit could be a yellow or a red hit, and then the other 2 hammers can be used, right? So you're just being forced to put your weapon on cooldown. You have to choose which one you have to put on cooldown if you're running triple hammer, and you're not getting away with spamming one weapon, right? It satisfies almost everyone to have this kind of system. I think they could easily come up with some UI system, or, you know, something that helps to show the player that, you know, their weapon is gaining heat. Like I said, steam ejecting from the weapon, or for instance, you know, the sound of your hammer pitch increasing, so that you can eventually, with more and more use of the weapon, you'll hear the pitch and you'll associate it with an overheating, right? And to compensate for this, I would suggest that we get a 12 damage red gauge, so that, you know, we bring back the old 12 damage, since the cooldown is now longer. I would even be happy if we brought it back and in exchange, we extended the cooldown to 8 seconds instead of 7. Because I think that the 12 damage brings back the identity of this really strong, heavy-hitting weapon on single targets that can go on a long cooldown when used improperly, right? That is basically the identity of the weapon, and I think we should maintain that as much as possible. It would also open up a lot of combos that can be made in the future. Maybe those can open up more with more balancing to other melee options, and also like the introduction of the gold arm. I also ran the math, for how someone could possibly exploit this system to the best of its ability by, switching between hammers perfectly on time and all that stuff. And I'll just flash that math on screen so that you can read it if you want, if you're a nerd like me. But yeah, millions of things could have happened. This was complicated. This would have been a big ask. Again, fraud seems like it's rushed. I still like most of fraud, don't get me wrong. I'll talk about that in another video, but most of fraud seems rushed. There are a million different ways that they could do the Jackhammer justice, and this was probably the biggest fail we could have ever seen. The Korjak Jackhammer is still going to be as strong as it once was, and that's not going to change. And the other two Jackhammers are just going to get weaker, even though they were weaker than the Korjak Jackhammer to begin with. And that's just a bad situation for everyone who plays ULTRAKILL and cares about this weapon. That's been my rant. Tell me everything you think, any which way you want to disagree with me in the comments, please. I'll be watching like a hawk everyone's opinion. So, yeah, I'll see ya.